Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight's sky isn't just glowing, it's growling. Above you, the sun lingers just beyond the visible veil, humming with an energy that feels personal. Invisible particles stream toward Earth, like whispers riding cosmic wind. You can't hear them, not really, but something in your spine says they're there. An ache behind your eyes, a restless pulse in the bones. Something's up, and it's not just your imagination. You probably won't survive this. Not if we're talking about satellite communication, power grids, or your poor GPS trying to figure out why it just rerouted you through the Pacific Ocean. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, will you drop your location and local time in the comments? I love seeing how far the Sleepy Science crew reaches when the world gets weird. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't usually think about the sun when you're falling asleep. It's up there doing its flaming gas ball thing, keeping plants alive, burning your skin when you forget sunscreen, making golden hour TikToks look romantic instead of just sticky. But lately the sun has been off. Not in the, hey, that's a big sunspot kind of way. More like, oh no, why is it making that noise and what does that mean for my microwave? Right now, as you lie there under your weighted blanket, particles older than your great-grandmother's houseplant are rocketing toward Earth at half the speed of light. And these are solar energetic particles, fast, furious, and completely uninvited. They come from coronal mass ejections, or CMS, which is just a technical way of saying the sun had a particularly aggressive sneeze and flung hot plasma into space. And we are in the splash zone. You might have heard space is silent, and technically sure, there's no air to carry sound waves. But this event, it's different. Instruments tuned to the right frequencies are picking up patterns, staticky pulses that resemble a heartbeat or maybe a warning. Something about it is off rhythm. Solar physicists are calling this a high activity window, which is adorable considering some of them have already pulled their kids out of boarding school in New Zealand. You see, we expect the sun to go through cycles, 11-year loops of high and low activity, tracked by the number of sunspots and other surface tantrums, but we're not where we should be. The sun is acting like it's at peak rage, even though technically it shouldn't be there for another 2 years. Historians still argue whether something similar happened in the 14th century, when a surge in auroras coincided with both the Black Death and several very dramatic religious movements. Coincidence? Maybe, but some scholars point out that high solar activity might affect more than just power grids. It could stir the human mind, or at least make everyone feel a little more crackly. And crackly is a good word for tonight. You imagine the space around Earth like a bubble, the magnetosphere stretched taut like cellophane. Every gust of solar wind makes it shimmer, ripple, strain. And just outside that membrane, cosmic rays gather like moths outside a screen door, waiting for a tear. Some satellites have already started tumbling. SpaceX lost a batch last week, not due to launch error, but atmospheric drag. The Earth's upper atmosphere has swelled from solar heating, puffing out just enough to create resistance where there usually isn't any. It's like a ghost breeze, unseen but fatal at 17,000 miles per hour. Here's the quirky bit. Back in the 18th century, a British astronomer named William Herschel believed that sunspots were holes in the sun's outer layers, revealing a cool, possibly habitable interior. He suggested that there might be people living in there. Solar mole people, basically. He also believed solar activity influenced wheat prices. Historians rolled their eyes for a while, but modern data does suggest some correlation between solar cycles and climate anomalies that affect crop yields. So, maybe Herschel wasn't entirely off his Victorian rocker. What you're sensing now, even without realizing it, might be part of something ancient and universal. Animals certainly feel it. Whales have beached themselves during past geomagnetic storms. Pigeons have flown straight into buildings. Migratory birds? Confused. Like showing up in Chicago in December confused. And then there's you. Your inner ear might be slightly off tonight. Your dreams might feel a little vivid. your fingers a little tingly. It could be the stress of a long day, or it could be the Earth's magnetic field wobbling just enough to confuse the systems you didn't know you had. Your body, after all, is a map of small electrical signals, heartbeats, nerve firings, even the strange voltage that makes your skin crawl when someone stares at you from across the room. If the sun's having a bad day, you might too. That's why governments monitor solar activity the same way they monitor hurricanes or volcanoes, except instead of evacuating towns, they just cross their fingers and hope people don't notice when the GPS tells them their house is in Greenland. You shift under your blanket, that tingling again. Is it real? Is it anxiety? Or is it the vague knowledge that 93 million miles away, a star is lashing out in your direction, throwing tantrums big enough to swallow planets whole? It's fine. Probably. Most of the time, these events pass with nothing more than some pretty lights and mild signal interference. But this time feels different. Not just stronger, stranger. Like the rules have shifted just a little, and nobody bothered to update the manual. You close your eyes, listening for a hum you can't hear, but swear is there. The room is quiet, but the sky is not. And as the particles stream toward Earth, crashing invisibly through the upper atmosphere, you wonder, when exactly did the sun stop being just a background character? The sun spits and the wind screams. Not your wind, of course. Not the gentle breeze outside your window that rustles the leaves and carries the scent of someone's poorly timed midnight barbecue. No, this is the solar wind, a million-mile-per-hour exhalation of charged particles, threading its way through the void like a ghost current. Usually it behaves, but tonight, it's lashing out, unpredictable pulses riding on invisible rivers of plasma, colliding with Earth's magnetic field like fists pounding on a steel drum. The instruments at the solar observatories are lighting up. Scientists are muttering in acronyms. And your phone's compass? Yeah, that's probably lying to you. Storms with no name. That's what they're calling them. These odd, in-between disturbances that don't quite qualify as geomagnetic storms, but still mess things up. They're like the sun's mood swings, erratic, disruptive, and difficult to predict. You won't find them on weather apps, but you might feel them when your Bluetooth earbuds refuse to pair, or when your smartwatch thinks you're climbing stairs in your sleep. And it's not just you. Tonight, pilots are noticing things. Communication dropouts on polar flights, instruments that lag for no reason. There's a sudden burst of static in the cockpit, followed by eerie silence. Some flights are rerouting already, not because of turbulence, but because the Earth's upper atmosphere is sizzling like a microwave burrito, and no one wants to fly through that. Back on the ground, amateur radio operators are having a terrible time, or a great time depending on how much they enjoy chaos. Frequencies that should be stable are flickering in and out like haunted house lights. Ham radio folks in Australia are talking to Norway. Norway thinks they're talking to Mars. This isn't the tidy kind of solar event that gets packaged into a nice headline. No Category 5 flare or record-breaking CME to show off. Instead, it's a squirmy, erratic wave of unclassified weirdness. Power companies call it nonlinear grid behavior. Astronomers call it transient flux. You call it the reason your Wi-Fi just died again. Here's the thing. We're wired to notice storms, thunder, rain, wind. We know those cues. We evolved under them. But solar storms? They happen without sound, without clouds, without warning. They affect everything around us and almost nothing we can perceive directly. It's like being haunted by electricity. And yet the signs are there. You just have to know where to look. Right now, deep sea buoys are picking up odd magnetic anomalies. Seismometers, those instruments designed to monitor earthquakes, are detecting faint rhythmic pulses, except there's no tectonic movement, just a soft, consistent thrum, almost like the Earth itself is picking up a solar dial tone. Some of this behavior doesn't even register in official channels, but out in the fringes, the Reddit forums, the YouTube rabbit holes, the ham radio blogs with more tinfoil than typography, people are buzzing. They're sharing screenshots of magnetometer graphs, snapshots of strange halos around the moon. videos of car radios picking up number stations that shouldn't exist anymore. Historians still argue whether unexplained mass behaviors, like the dancing plague of 1518 or the Tanganyika laughter epidemic, could have been influenced by shifts in the electromagnetic environment. There's no proof, but there's also no satisfying explanation. And now, in the age of solar sensors and space weather satellites, we're starting to see just how weirdly connected everything might be. Tonight's storm doesn't have a name, but it's doing damage. In Quebec, engineers are noticing transformer oscillations, little hiccups in the power grid that shouldn't be happening. Or they're watching the data with white-knuckle intensity, knowing that if too many of those spikes line up, the system could trip itself offline again. Because yes, Quebec knows. Back in 1989, a solar storm knocked out their entire grid for 9 hours. Lights went out, subways stalled, people spilled into dark streets and stared up at the sky, which, by the way, was glowing green. So they're watching carefully. Meanwhile, high above you, satellites are being problematic. Not destroyed, not completely, but weird. GPS drift is increasing. A geosynchronous satellite just performed a tiny course correction that no one ordered. One satellite spontaneously rebooted itself. Twice. The explanation given was anomalous memory behavior, which is space speak for, we have no idea what's going on. Fun fringe fact, during a particularly intense solar storm in 2003, the Japanese weather satellite Midori, too flat out ghosted. No warning, no dramatic explosion, just silence. And when ground control finally reestablished contact, the satellite reported it had shut down all non-essential systems, including its memory, because it thought it was on fire. It wasn't, but the sun had fooled it. You wonder how many of tonight's disruptions are being misfiled as user error. A dropped call, a bad Zoom connection, a navigation app that leads you to the middle of a lake. All little glitches that don't seem connected until you realize they're all happening at once. And this is the part no one tells you about. How fragile our systems really are. How we've built a civilization entirely dependent on signals, syncs, and invisible handshakes between machines floating in space, and how those signals get scrambled by things we can't even see. You turn on your phone's flashlight, it flickers for just a second too long before responding. Maybe it's your imagination, or maybe it's the solar wind, unnameable, unstoppable, curling its fingers around the upper edges of your world. The irony, of course, is that the sun doesn't care. It doesn't notice us. This entire storm, this entire cascade of malfunctions and auroras and worried emails between scientists, it's the result of a minor burp, a twitch, a barely detectable release of pent-up plasma that just happened to be aimed in our direction. But that's the trick with space weather. It doesn't need to try hard to ruin your week. So here you are, watching a storm that doesn't show up on the radar, but rattles the bones of satellites and whispers strange ideas into the static of old radios. You lie still, listening for a sound you won't hear, while overhead, the magnetosphere shudders under the weight of something ancient and electric and just slightly wrong. And this is only the beginning. You don't usually notice a magnetic pole flip. It's not like the Earth spins upside down like a forgotten fidget spinner. But the sun does it with flair. Roughly every 11 years, the sun's magnetic field flips. North becomes south, and vice versa, like a cosmic light switch flicked by a celestial toddler. This is expected, baked into solar physics. The solar maximum comes, honey, sunspots go wild, the field reverses, and then everything calms down for a while. Except now, it happened early, and not in a calm, predictable, textbook kind of way. This time, it flipped with all the grace of a washing machine throwing itself off balance mid-cycle. Satellites detected the change, those sensitive little instruments measuring solar polarity like digital weather vanes. What they picked up was messy, asymmetrical, lopsided. One pole shifted weeks before the other. The magnetic equator, yes, that's a real thing, wobbled like a drunk tightrope walker. Historians still argue whether this has happened before. Solar records only go back a few hundred years, and reliable ones, maybe a century or so. Beyond that, we have ice cores, tree rings, and desperate guesses. Some researchers point to medieval-era aurora sightings and odd climate dips as signs of premature flips. Others say it's just solar noise. Either way, if this has happened before, we weren't exactly prepared then either. But what does a magnetic flip even mean for you? Well, imagine the sun's magnetic field as the scaffolding that holds all its activity in check. When it flips everything, the flares, the sunspots, the coronal mass ejections, gets a little unpredictable, like shaking a soda bottle and slowly twisting off the cap. Things that should stay confined don't. Particles escape at strange angles. Energy that should dissipate instead gets funneled right toward Earth. And that's where it gets weird. Right now, scientists are watching the heliospheric current sheet, the sprawling, when a wavy magnetic boundary that flows through the solar system like a cosmic slipstream. Normally, it's stable-ish, but since the flip, it's been flailing like a ribbon in a hurricane. This means more charged particles, more cosmic rays, more solar debris getting caught up and hurled our way. One researcher compared it to a blender losing its lid. Another called it a chaotic but fascinating data set, which is academic code for we're a little concerned but not allowed to panic in public. And remember how this flip came early? That throws off our models. Forecasts that said we wouldn't reach peak solar activity until 2025 now look hilariously outdated. The sun seems to have skipped the warm-up act and gone straight to the encore. And the instruments don't know what to do with that. It's like trying to follow a playlist, but someone shuffled in a death metal track between two lo-fi beats. Meanwhile, space weather centers are quietly raising alert levels. Not DEF CON exactly, but the nerdy solar version, KP indices, AP values, DST indexes, all climbing just enough to make solar physicists refresh their dashboards a little too often. And what's the quirky, unexpected angle tonight? You'll like this one. Back in the 1950s, scientists tried to artificially create a miniature version of a magnetic flip. They wanted to understand magnetic reconnection, the violent snapping and rejoining of magnetic lines. So naturally, they launched a nuke into space. It was called Project Argus, and yes, they actually created artificial auroras. The blast dumped charged particles into the magnetosphere and made the sky glow in places it absolutely shouldn't have. And the test worked, sort of, but the results spooked everyone enough that they quietly stopped doing it, which is probably for the best. You don't want to start a war with the ionosphere. It will win. You shift under your blanket again. There's a feeling you can't quite name. Not fear exactly. More like the sensation of standing too close to a live wire. Something humming just beyond perception. And above you, the sun continues to swirl, its flipped magnetic poles now aligned in ways that send energy sweeping out like unplanned fireworks. You might think all this happens far away, but the truth is your entire life runs on signals filtered through this ever-changing magnetic mess. The GPS in your phone depends on satellites calibrated to millisecond precision. The timing of financial transactions, stock trades, bank transfers, our crypto exchanges are synchronized with atomic clocks that rely on unshaken electromagnetic environments. When the sun flips early, those systems get twitchy. Earlier today, there were reports of automated trading platforms triggering false buys. Blame timing discrepancies. But if you dig into the engineering reports, you'll find quiet footnotes. Possible correlation with solar event. In other words, the sun sneezed and Wall Street flinched. And here's the really fun part. Earth's magnetic field is also weakening. This isn't sudden, and it's not fully related to the sun's flip. But the timing is inconvenient. Some regions, like over South America and parts of the South Atlantic, are especially vulnerable. Areas known as magnetic anomalies, where the field is so thin that satellites dip dangerously close to the upper atmosphere. We're risking radiation exposure. If solar storms keep increasing, those anomalies become pressure points, like weak spots in a shield. And with the sun firing unpredictably, that shield matters more than ever. So tonight, as you lie still, remember, above you, 93 million miles away, a star just turned itself inside out. Its north and south have reversed, and with them, the rules of solar weather have gone fuzzy. And here on Earth, machines, animals, and possibly even your dreams are scrambling to adjust. No, you won't see it. No fireworks, no sci-fi laser beams. Just that low electric tension, a sense of things slipping slightly out of sync, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the sun knows we're watching. You wouldn't expect to see auroras over Texas, but tonight the sky is misbehaving. What should be quiet, star-flecked blackness over the Lone Star State is instead streaked with eerie green curtains, pulsing gently like the sky's lungs are breathing. Locals step out onto porches with phones already aimed skyward, mouths open. Someone mutters something about aliens. Someone else goes live on Instagram. But none of them can explain what they're seeing, because this isn't just rare, it's not supposed to happen. The aurora borealis is meant to stay north, way north. Alaska, Norway, maybe Michigan if it's feeling generous. But lately the lights have been dipping down into places that have never seen them before. Missouri, Georgia, even northern Mexico on a particularly dramatic night last week. Scientists call it auroral oval expansion. You might call it unsettlingly pretty. Tonight you're lying in the dark, and your window reflects nothing but the slow dance of electromagnetic poetry on the upper atmosphere. It's soft, but it's not soothing. The colors feel like a warning dressed in silk. You might remember from science class that auroras happen when solar particles slam into Earth's magnetic field. They're guided toward the poles, funneled down like sparks down invisible highways. When they reach the atmosphere, they crash into atoms and make them glow. Green for oxygen, red if things get really excited. But tonight's display is more than just a visual treat. It's evidence of something going sideways up there. Earth's magnetic field is stretched like taffy right now, pulled thin by the sun's recent tantrums. The usual auroral boundaries are wobbling. They've lost definition. It's like the solar wind is cheating on its test and copying answers off Jupiter's paper. Because these lights, they've got range. Historians still argue whether the auroras described in Chinese court records in 776 CE were the result of a solar flare or something even more extreme. The documents mention a red vapor filling the sky for several nights, terrifying citizens and prompting royal astrologers to suggest it meant a change in dynastic fate. No one died, not from the lights anyway, but the emperor probably lost some sleep. You roll over and try to imagine what that would have looked like before electricity, before cities, before phones. Just red sky, silent and wrong, stretching across a terrified world with no explanation. Now imagine seeing that over Dallas. And that's not a mood the weather team is prepared to explain between traffic and pollen counts. In places where auroras do happen, tonight's display is different. Not just the color, though there's been an unusually rich purple hue popping up, but the shape. Instead of smooth arcs or fluttering ribbons, some sightings are showing vertical spikes, symmetrical pillars like the bars of a massive cage. One satellite captured what appeared to be a rotating auroral spiral, something so geometrically perfect that Reddit declared it was either aliens or a government experiment. Probably both. And here comes your quirky tidbit of the night. During World War II, British pilots occasionally reported seeing auroral flashes timed perfectly with their engine sputters, as if the sky were reacting to them. No official explanation ever stuck. Most dismissed it as altitude-related hallucinations or equipment feedback, but some argued the aurora might be capable of electrical interference, more localized than we realized. Basically, the sky briefly judged their engines. Rude. That judgmental energy seems to be back. In places with particularly intense auroral displays tonight, power substations are on high alert. Not because of light shows, but because auroras are just the pretty mask worn by geomagnetic activity that can fry transformers like cheap toaster ovens. When the field gets warped, long conductors, like power lines, act like antennas, picking up currents they were never designed to carry. And you don't want to be the one flipping the switch when the grid starts to hum. This already happened once in Sweden earlier this week. A rural utility station recorded a sudden voltage spike right as a blood-red aurora unfurled overhead. No warning, just a flash, a spark, and then 3 hours of blackout. When they rebooted the system, the log file simply said, "External current detected." You lie still. Your lights are still on, for now. But if they weren't, Would you be able to tell if the colors overhead were something beautiful or something else entirely? Somewhere deep in the Arctic, aurora chasers with night vision goggles are recording magnetic data from portable monitors. They whisper updates into radios, comparing notes about flickering edges and spectral movement. One mutters about a shadow pattern, another reports a dip in compass accuracy. The aurora isn't just expanding, it's distorting, bending into shapes that defy the usual flow. One theory, and it's not mainstream, but it's circulating, is that the sun's recent early polarity flip is letting high-latitude energy sneak further down Earth's field lines than it normally would, like water leaking through the seams of a dam not built to hold it. The particles come down in strange places, the sky lights up where it shouldn't, and the Earth stirs. A few brave researchers are even looking into correlations between auroral events and dream patterns. Not a joke. There's a quiet study from Finland suggesting that certain kinds of geomagnetic activity seem to influence REM cycles. Subjects report unusually vivid dreams on auroral nights, more color, more movement, a sense of narrative. You glance toward the window again, even if you're nowhere near where the aurora can be seen. There's nothing there but soft darkness. Still, your heart feels oddly elevated. Your thoughts a little more scattered than usual. That might just be the story, sure. Or it might be something else. Something humming in the atmosphere above you, just beyond your reach. The lights are dancing where they shouldn't be. And for every person snapping a photo, there are dozens quietly watching, wondering what exactly the sky is trying to tell them. You're not supposed to see the aurora from here, but tonight the world is bending, and the lights are watching back. Up there, far above your head, satellites are getting twitchy. You might picture them as sleek, purposeful machines gliding through space with scientific poise. In reality, they're more like overworked interns, delicate, anxious, and highly sensitive to their environment. And right now, that environment is actively trying to kill them. Satellites don't like solar storms. They hate geomagnetic pressure. And most of all, they despise sudden bursts of high-energy particles, which can fry circuits, scramble software, or cause them to misbehave in charmingly catastrophic ways. Tonight, several of them are doing exactly that. One weather satellite just glitched mid-transmission, sending back a blurry mosaic of pixelated clouds and unreadable data. Another, a communications relay, quietly slipped out of its geosynchronous position by 0.06 degrees, just enough to make your streaming service stutter for a second, then blame your internet provider. Little errors, harmless hiccups, until they add up. There's even a technical term for it, single event upsets. So now that's when a single charged particle, just one, strikes a satellite's microprocessor and flips a bit from a 0 to a 1. That's it, one little mutation. But if that bit controls, say, thermal regulation or orientation thrusters, congratulations. You've just given your $500 million satellite an identity crisis. You know what causes a lot of single event upsets? Solar events, especially weird ones like this. And tonight we're watching satellites lose their cool like it's freshman finals week and nobody brought snacks. Back in 1994, a Canadian telecom satellite called a NIC E1 stopped responding after a geomagnetic storm fried its onboard circuits. For hours, millions lost access to cable TV and international phone calls. The backup satellite, ANIC E2, took over, and then it went down too. For a moment, Canadian telecom was completely at the mercy of the sun. Historians still argue whether it was poor shielding or just bad timing. But ever since, satellite engineers have built their systems with extra layers of protection: insulation, redundancy, automatic failsafes. Unfortunately, none of those help if the satellite simply forgets where it is. That's happening tonight. Several low Earth orbiting satellites are reporting strange anomalies: momentary power dips, inconsistent positional data, minor sensor blindness. Some of them recover, some go offline. One sends back a telemetry log filled with random zeros and then quietly resets. It's like they're all having little panic attacks in space. Meanwhile, down here, airline systems are scrambling to stay one step ahead. When commercial flights that rely on satellite-based navigation are seeing signal jitter. Not full failure, yet, but enough to make transoceanic autopilot systems squirm. Planes flying over the poles, where Earth's magnetic field is weakest, are being quietly rerouted southward. The sun's energy doesn't hit the whole planet equally after all. It targets the gaps. Airlines don't announce this stuff. They don't want panic. But behind the scenes, air traffic controllers and onboard avionics teams are watching their monitors with hawk-eyed precision. A solar event this intense can mean more radiation exposure for passengers at cruising altitudes, more electrical interference, more opportunities for things to quietly go wrong. And it's not just air travel. GPS satellites are also feeling the strain. Their delicate atomic clocks depend on perfect timing. Tonight, they're seeing time drifts measured in nanoseconds, not noticeable to humans, but devastating to anything that depends on geolocation, like your rideshare app, or autonomous tractors, or missile systems. Yes, those systems. That's why the military is also watching this storm very, very closely. In fact, some defense satellites are put into passive mode during solar events like this to avoid false positives, like mistaking a burst of cosmic rays for a ballistic launch. Back in 1979, a solar flare briefly blinded NORAD's sensors, triggering a temporary but deeply uncomfortable alert. Cooler heads prevailed, but not before someone had a hand hovering very close to a very important button. Here's your quirky angle for the night. In 1962, the U.S. detonated a nuclear weapon in space. It was called Starfish Prime. The explosion created an artificial radiation belt that knocked out several satellites, including some that weren't even launched by the U.S. It was the first time humanity damaged its own space infrastructure. Before most people even knew there was space infrastructure. We learned from that. Kind of. But the real lesson was how shockingly easy it is to cripple satellite networks. All it takes is energy. And the sun, on nights like this, is dishing it out for free. You wonder briefly, what would happen if this storm kept escalating? If a major navigation satellite failed? If a communication satellite drifted out of sync? If the signals threading our world, timing, data, voice, vision, all began to wobble? Your phone sits beside you on the nightstand. It looks calm, but innocent. But inside, it's talking to towers. Those towers are talking to satellites. And those satellites are swimming in a magnetic soup none of them were quite ready for. Somewhere, a satellite's onboard computer is running self-checks, rebooting, realigning its solar panels. It doesn't know what's hitting it. It only knows it wants to stay alive. You almost feel bad for it. Up there, alone, doing its best. You exhale slowly and think about all the things that rely on satellites. Weather, banking, military logistics, global supply chains, Instagram filters. And you realize, if this keeps going, the glitching is just the start. Down below, where the satellites can't see, the animals are acting off. It starts subtle as it always does. Migratory birds veering slightly off course. Schools of fish moving earlier than expected. A bat colony in Argentina emerges at dusk only to swirl in confused spirals, like someone hits shuffle on their echolocation playlist. But then it escalates. In the Florida wetlands, tag storks are moving south instead of north. Arctic terns, normally champions of long-distance navigation, have started circling over unfamiliar terrain as if they've forgotten the way home. And in the Pacific, deep-sea sensors have detected something odd. Species that normally remain hundreds of meters below the surface are rising early, not just by feet, but by miles. It's the kind of movement that makes marine biologists sit up in the middle of the night and double-check coordinates. The cause? Most likely the same invisible force that's rattling satellites and repainting the skies. Geomagnetic disruption. You see, many animals don't just migrate with maps, they migrate with magnets. Tiny crystals of magnetite inside their bodies let them feel Earth's magnetic field like a compass stitched into their skin. It's called magnetoreception, and it's not some fringe science. It's very real. Pigeons have it, sea turtles have it, whales, wolves, even certain bacteria rely on it. And when that field starts to wobble, when the sky is ablaze with rogue auroras and charged particles are punching holes in the ionosphere, well, the compass starts spinning. Historians still argue whether the mass whale strandings recorded in the 1700s off the coast of New Zealand were related to auroral activity noted by sailors in the same week. There's no hard evidence, but logs describe northern lights in the south and fish fleeing toward warmer waters. Coincidence? Maybe. But here we are again. And it's not just the whales. Tonight in Alaska, a pack of tagged wolves has split in two, half continuing their usual trail, the others wandering in the opposite direction with no obvious environmental cue. In the Atlantic, a cargo ship reports a sudden influx of seabirds landing on deck mid-crossing, huddled together like they've lost track of north. They're not injured, just disoriented, like they've been spun around by something they can't name. Your quirky tidbit for the night? Cows. Yes, cows. A 2008 study using Google Earth images, yes, really found that cows tend to align themselves along magnetic north while grazing or resting, like four-legged compass needles in an open field. But during geomagnetic storms, that alignment breaks down. They scatter, face random directions, and show signs of stress. Farmers have known this for decades, they just didn't have the science to explain it. Until now. Right now, the animals know something's up. Long before our sensors beep and our satellites flinch, the biological network begins to twitch. Migratory patterns scramble. Breeding cues delay. Even domestic pets seem edgy. You've probably seen this before in your own dog or cat. Those strange moments when they stare into corners, ears flicking, body tense. Tonight, that instinct might be firing more than usual. Not because they see ghosts, but because their inner compass, whatever vestigial remnant they've retained from their wilder ancestors, is buzzing. You lie there in the dark and think about how much of Earth's life is tied to this invisible field. Not just navigation, but sleep, mating, feeding, and migration. The entire biosphere, in some way, pulses in rhythm with the planet's magnetic beat. So what happens when that beat skips? That question keeps ecologists up at night. Because geomagnetic disturbances don't just confuse animals, they sometimes kill them. In 2011, a pod of pilot whales beached themselves in the Florida Keys during a minor geomagnetic event. Local rescuers tried to guide them back to sea. Some survived, many didn't. Follow-up research suggested that solar activity might have interfered with their internal navigation systems, leading them into shallow waters they couldn't escape. Now, with the sun in full tantrum mode, animal tracking labs across the globe are flagging anomalies. Swarms of data points blinking red, patterns breaking, algorithms failing to predict even short-term behavior. And yet, the animals still try. You picture a loggerhead sea turtle on hundreds of miles offshore, turning slightly to adjust her course, only to find the pull of home suddenly gone. She spins. She pauses, then swims onward, following an instinct that has guided her species for millennia, now distorted by cosmic static. That static is everywhere tonight, even in you. Some researchers are exploring whether humans might have vestigial magnetoreception, tiny magnetic particles in our sinuses or brains that once let us feel the field too. It's not proven, but experiments have shown that under certain conditions, human brainwaves react slightly when exposed to simulated geomagnetic changes. Could be coincidence, could be real, but it raises an eerie possibility. Maybe you feel it too. Maybe that vague unease pressing on your chest isn't just stress. Maybe it's a distant echo of the field flexing above you, rippling through your cells like a whisper from space. The same whisper the birds hear. The same hum making the sturgeon leap too soon, the bats fly too far. Tonight, nature is scrambling to recalibrate. The animal kingdom is listening. And while we fumble with apps and error messages, they simply react. Not because they understand, but because they've always known when the world begins to shift. The radiation isn't loud, it doesn't sizzle, it doesn't flash or crackle or hiss like in the movies. Instead, it moves silently, threading through atmosphere and bone, sneaking past skin and metal alike. You can't hear it, you can't feel it. But tonight, the numbers are ticking up. Cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space. Normally, Earth's magnetic field shrugs most of them off, deflecting them toward the poles where they harmlessly bounce around the upper atmosphere. But not tonight. Tonight, the field is weakened, trembling under solar pressure. And when that happens, those rays get bold. They slip through. Some strike the ionosphere, creating bursts of invisible static. Others pierce deeper, colliding with atoms in the upper atmosphere and setting off miniature particle cascades. Nuclear domino effects that scientists call air showers. Sounds cute, isn't? Especially when they punch straight through a jetliner at cruising altitude. Right now, tens of thousands of people are flying at 35,000 feet through air peppered with charged particles, moving close to the speed of light. It's not lethal. It's not even dangerous yet, but it's more exposure than most passengers signed up for. And the flight crews know it. Airline radiation tracking systems are glowing a little red tonight. That's why right this second, pilots on certain transpolar flights are descending. Not because of turbulence, but because radiation exposure doubles every 6,000 feet of altitude. A little lower means a lot safer. So they dip, not much, not enough to notice if you're watching the in-flight movie, but just enough to duck beneath the worst of it. You probably didn't know that's a thing. Most people don't. But long-haul flight attendants track their cumulative radiation, like you'd track cholesterol. The FAA actually has guidelines. Cosmic radiation is one of the few workplace hazards that comes straight from a star 93 million miles away. Back in 2015, researchers studying ice cores from Antarctica discovered strange isotopic signatures, evidence of a spike in cosmic radiation sometime around the year 774 CE. No explosion, no comet, no volcano. Just an unexplained planet-wide uptick. Historians still argue whether it was caused by a supernova, a massive solar flare, or something stranger. But tonight's event is creating its own spike. Radiation detectors in the upper troposphere are logging more hits than they have in years. Neutron monitors on the ground, yes, that's a thing, are twitching like they've had too much coffee. The sun isn't just tossing light and plasma at us, it's tossing triggers. Because when this kind of energy moves through a system, biological, mechanical, atmospheric, it stirs up more than numbers. You're probably safe. When your blanket shields you about as well as a leaf in the rain, but you're low enough, grounded enough, that most of the nasty stuff glances off Earth's atmosphere. Mostly. But up in the high altitudes, pilots are quietly calculating exposure limits. Astronauts aboard the ISS? They're ducking into radiation shelters, small, windowless compartments lined with extra shielding, just in case. It's a routine drill. But tonight, it doesn't feel routine. A fringe theory? All right, here's one for you. There's a small but persistent group of researchers who believe that spikes in cosmic radiation influence not just technology, but biology, specifically human mutation rates. The idea is this: high-energy particles can damage DNA. Most of the time, your body repairs the damage, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes that little glitch leads to something new. Maybe good, maybe bad, maybe both. It's fringe, sure, but not fantasy. After all, radiation has shaped evolution before. Cosmic rays may have helped drive natural selection, nudging species into new forms, one corrupted chromosome at a time. One researcher even called them the universe's editorial comments, subtle, invisible notes in the margins of life. Tonight, the editor is active. You shift under your blanket. Feel that vague tingling in your legs? That's not radiation. It's probably just the position you're lying in. Probably, but it's easy to imagine something else. A subtle pulse, a gentle stirring in your cells. Not painful, just there. This is the strange intimacy of solar events. They happen millions of miles away, but they reach you in ways nothing else does. Not through sight or sound, but through your body, through the shield of your planet and into the very chemistry of your blood. It's science. It's spooky. It's spectacular. And the whispers from Antarctica are back. Because here's the kicker. Ice doesn't lie. Inside those frozen cores are annual layers like tree rings, recording every major atmospheric anomaly in Earth's recent history. And guess what? Right now, scientists at Concordia Station are logging fresh isotopic anomalies, tiny but measurable spikes that match the same patterns from 774 CE, which, if you remember, corresponded with unexplained global radiation increase and sky phenomena that terrified entire empires. No one's calling it a repeat. Not officially, but the data is there, whispering. This is the part where someone usually says, yeah, and we just need more time to study it. Fair, sensible, but also terrifying, because space doesn't wait for paperwork, and cosmic rays don't care about your funding cycle. And here comes your historical fact for dessert. In 1989, during a less intense solar event than the one we're seeing now, a cosmic ray triggered an error in a microchip at a nuclear power plant in Belgium. The particle flipped a single bit, one tiny zero turned into a one, and shut down a reactor. No damage, just confusion. But it was the first official acknowledgement that space weather could affect nuclear systems. Yes, nuclear. You'd think that would get more attention. Tonight, cosmic radiation is creeping through the sky like mist through a screen door. It won't burn you, it won't make you glow, but it will leave fingerprints in cloud chambers, in memory chips, in the quiet shifts happening inside your body while you sleep. You're safe, for now, but the radiation whispers, and the whisper is getting louder. The last time this almost broke the world, it started with a flicker. One soft flash on a telegraph line, then a sizzle. Then, somewhere deep in the bones of 19th century America, the wires caught fire. It was 1859, and the world was just beginning to stitch itself together with copper and code. The Victorian internet, if you will. Telegraph lines stretching across continents, pulsing with Morse. Speed, progress. And then came the Carrington event. On the morning of September 1st, two British astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson, were watching the sun through smoked glass because safety wasn't quite a vibe yet. And what they saw was unprecedented. A blinding white flare erupting from a sunspot, so sudden and intense it made them stumble back. Carrington later described it as a sudden brightening, but that's Victorian understatement for the sun just threw a haymaker. 17 hours later, Earth lit up. The night skies erupted in auroras so bright they woke miners in Colorado. Gold prospectors thought it was morning and started cooking breakfast. In Havana, the horizon glowed like the northern lights had taken a wrong turn. And in Boston, telegraph operators screamed as sparks shot from their keys. Lines burst into flame, papers scorched, operators disconnected batteries, and the lines kept transmitting anyway. The solar energy had charged the wires directly. Telegraph systems functioned without power. For hours, it was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the closest we've ever come to seeing the raw power of a solar storm slap modern infrastructure across the face. And if it happened again today, well, you probably wouldn't be reading this. Historians still argue whether the Carrington event was truly the most powerful geomagnetic storm in recorded history. Some point to other ancient records, Chinese texts describing sky fire, or Aboriginal oral histories of days that never ended, as hints of earlier, possibly even stronger events. But what makes Carrington unique is how connected the world had just become. For the first time, human technology was visible enough, vulnerable enough, to be scorched by the sun. And now, we are far, far more exposed. That same event today would be catastrophic. Power grids would collapse, satellites would fry, internet cables, especially the undersea ones with exposed repeaters, could fail en masse. GPS? Gone. Communication? Spotty at best. Transportation? Grounded or lost. Banking? Food supply? Emergency response? Social media? Your precious ability to tweet through the apocalypse. All of it, fragile. And tonight's event, while not as sudden, carries an eerie echo. A pattern in the magnetic field. A rhythm in the solar wind that scientists are quietly, nervously, comparing to the 1859 data. The structure is there. The intensity is building. And once again, the instruments are struggling to keep up. And here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. Because if the Carrington event was a punch, this might be a slow squeeze. Less Hollywood, more slow burn thriller. This isn't a single explosion of solar rage, it's a cluster. A swarm of CMEs, sunspots, shortening and field fluctuations that could keep the pressure up for days or longer. And we're already seeing strain. Earlier today, multiple long-wave radio bands dropped out simultaneously across several continents. Not just flickers, full blackouts. Maritime weather reports vanished mid-transmission. Aviation channels crackled and died. And somewhere in a research outpost in Siberia, a team of geophysicists posted one word on their monitoring blog: Carrington? Then silence. Your quirky tidbit? Telegraph operators during the original event were so overwhelmed, some thought they were under attack. A few even blamed God. One account from Pennsylvania describes an operator throwing holy water on the equipment after a particularly loud spark. It didn't help, but it made him feel better. Tonight, the sky is quiet, but the atmosphere is not. And Earth's magnetic field is vibrating, ever so slightly, at frequencies our ancestors didn't have the instruments to detect. Now we do, and what we're seeing isn't clean. It's messy, jittery, like a tuning fork trying to hum in the middle of an earthquake. There's a growing fear among solar scientists that we're living in the early stages of a modern Carrington. Only instead of one big blast, we're facing a cascading failure scenario. Like dominoes spaced just a little too close together. You look at your screen, it still works. Your lights are still on. But somewhere, right now, there's a satellite rebooting, a transformer humming, a signal stuttering across the globe. The last Carrington left the world in awe. This one might leave it blinking in the dark. Because here's the real kicker. We don't know what the upper limit of solar storm power is. The Carrington event is simply the strongest one we've measured. That doesn't mean it's the strongest that's ever happened. It just means we got lucky that time. And luck runs out. Right now, as you lie back and try to let the noise fade into background, the Earth is surrounded by a shell of charged particles. The magnetosphere is holding barely. But if one more CME hits just right, the balance could tip. And if it does, we'll all be back to wires and sparks, but this time, there's a lot more plugged in. The sun has a face tonight, not a literal one. Don't worry, it hasn't sprouted eyes and teeth and started whispering your name. But the sunspots are arranged in patterns that are making solar physicists deeply uncomfortable. And there are a lot of them. And they're symmetrical, too symmetrical. Across the sun's churning surface, dark blotches have bloomed in near-perfect mirror formations, two clusters on either side of the solar equator, forming what looks eerily like a pair of glaring eyes. Some viewers online are calling it the sun skull. Others have gone with the Eye of Helios, which is dramatic but fair. One image captured from a high-altitude balloon shows what looks like a grim, pixelated frown stretching across the lower hemisphere of the solar disk. It's funny, until you realize each of those eye sockets is roughly the size of Jupiter. Sunspots are not unusual. They're just regions of intense magnetic activity where the sun's surface is cooler than usual. But this current arrangement, it's like the solar version of crop circles. Too big, it's too structured, and forming far too fast. Historians still argue whether similar sunspot formations were recorded during the Maunder Minimum, the period from 1645 to 1715, when sunspots mysteriously vanished for decades, and Europe froze its way into what we now call the Little Ice Age. Some drawings from that time suggest strange shapes, symmetrical patterns, but the documentation is sparse, often poetic. A black mask upon the sun, one astronomer wrote in 1706. He didn't elaborate. Right now, the Solar Dynamics Observatory is pinging new alerts almost hourly. The number of sunspots has more than doubled in just 4 days. And the magnetograms, the instruments that track magnetic polarity, are showing odd reversals inside the sunspots themselves, like layered turbulence, nested fields. It's chaos under a microscope. When you might be wondering, why should you care what the sun looks like? Because these aren't just freckles, they're cannons. Sunspots are often the birthplace of solar flares and coronal mass ejections. The bigger and more complex the sunspot, the more likely it is to explode. And these symmetrical clusters, they're flaring in sync. Twin eruptions, stereo tantrums. Earlier today, twin X-class flares launched simultaneously from opposite hemispheres of the sun. That's rare, very rare. The last time we saw mirrored flares like this was in 2003, during the so-called Halloween storms that disrupted satellites, blinded spacecraft sensors, and forced astronauts into shelter. This time the flares were aimed just off-center, a glancing blow. The Earth wasn't the bullseye, just near the edge of the blast cone, which is good, probably still. The shock waves are coming, the charged particles are on their way, and we don't know what's next because the sunspots are still changing, still growing. Here's a quirky nugget for you. In the 19th century, some scientists believed sunspots were literal holes in the sun, revealing a darker, cooler interior. A place where life, yes, solar life, could exist. One even proposed that advanced beings might be responsible for the symmetrical patterns, using them to communicate. Solar hieroglyphs, he called them. Ridiculous, of course. But then again, tonight you're staring at a satellite image of a frowning sun face and wondering if maybe the Victorians were onto something. Conspiracy corners of the internet are losing their minds, obviously. There's talk of solar codes, celestial omens, secret sun cults. TikTok is flooded with glitchy voiceovers warning you to avoid looking directly at the light and to keep your phones off between 3:17 and 3:33 a.m. One guy claims the sunspots form a QR code that leads to a NASA server. Another says it's a countdown. But forget all that. What matters is the physics, because symmetry in sunspot activity isn't just spooky, it's a sign of massive underlying magnetic reorganization. It's like watching tectonic plates shift beneath a lava lake. Pressure building, cracks forming, until eventually, inevitably, something has to give. And the thing is, no one knows when that give happens, or what form it takes. Right now, Earth is inside a swirling cocoon of charged particles from previous flares. The magnetosphere is stressed, flexed, stretched. If another big ejection happens and lands squarely on this wobbly field, things could cascade fast. Satellites are already on edge. Power grids are in sensitive balance. But most concerning of all, the sunspots are moving towards center disk. That's right. Those symmetrical clusters, the twin dark eyes, are rotating into geo-effective position. That means any flares or CMEs launched from them over the next few days will be aimed squarely at Earth. You lie there and imagine the sun turning toward us, as if it knows, as if it's watching. Earlier today, an amateur astronomer in Chile pointed his solar telescope at the sun and captured a brief time-lapse of the sunspots flaring in sequence. He overlaid it with eerie ambient music and posted it with no caption. The comment section filled up in minutes. Why does it look like it's blinking? Bro, that's not normal. Is this real or AI? I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. You can't blame them. It's hard not to personify something so big and ancient and suddenly symmetrical. It feels intentional. Even though it's just plasma and magnetism and math, it still feels like a message or a warning. You take a slow breath. The night outside your window looks peaceful. But above the clouds, above the plains and weather and silent satellites, the sun is staring down with a new face, and the face is frowning. High above the Earth, tucked into a cozy tin can, hurtling through low Earth orbit, the astronauts are not asleep. They're inside the International Space Station, where night and day come every 90 minutes, and nothing ever truly feels quiet. Normally, it's a routine rhythm, experiments, maintenance, a view of Earth that would make most poets weep into their soy packets. But not tonight. Tonight, the shielding protocols have been activated. The crew has moved into the most protected part of the ISS, a densely packed module surrounded by extra layers of equipment and supplies that just so happen to make excellent impromptu radiation barriers. You'd think something this important would have its own lead line bunker, but no. It's more like a glorified closet with science equipment and sleeping bags. A space version of a pillow fort, except what they're hiding from is a storm of high-energy particles moving at half the speed of light. Because when the sun flares, astronauts are the first to know. Unlike you, wrapped in your gravity-soaked blanket, they have no atmospheric buffer, no magnetosphere to cradle them. When a coronal mass ejection barrels toward Earth, the warnings for them come in minutes, not hours, and those warnings sound very different in space. Tonight's solar flare was strong, not a direct hit, but close enough to cause concern. Space weather forecasting centers lit up red. The station's radiation detectors ticked upward, and within the hour the call came in. Shelter protocols active. It's not the first time. The Apollo astronauts dealt with it. So did space shuttle crews. But this storm is different, stronger, prolonged, and laced with strange anomalies that are making mission control sweat through their headset foam. Historians still argue whether the early Soviet space program lost a cosmonaut to radiation exposure during an undocumented solar event in the late 60s. No official record exists, just whispers and an unusually vague obituary. But space agencies learn fast. You do not mess with solar weather, so tonight the astronauts huddle. They've run this drill before, but it never feels routine. There's something unsettling about crowding into a metal closet and waiting for invisible energy to finish screaming past you. You can't see it, can't hear it, but every nerve in your body knows it's out there. And while they wait, mission control back on Earth runs calculations. They're tracking incoming particle flux, checking shield durability, comparing the radiation exposure against long-term dosage limits. Because up here in microgravity, at every extra rem of radiation counts. It's not just about surviving the night, it's about what builds in your DNA over years, what might twist into something darker later. Meanwhile, experiments are on pause. Robotics are offline. Outside the station, tiny cameras record a silent ballet of charged particles dancing across the hull. Brief flickers of static, unseen by human eyes, but glowing on the sensor logs like electronic fireflies. And then comes the glitch. At exactly 2:13 UTC, one of the station's star trackers, used to orient the ISS using known positions of stars, suddenly reports null data, just blanks. For 5 full seconds, it sees nothing. A second unit confirms the anomaly. Then everything snaps back to normal. Was it a fault, a sensor hiccup, or something passing through, something big enough, energetic enough, to temporarily blind a telescope designed to read starlight? Mission control doesn't say. The astronauts don't ask. But in their radiation shelter, they share a look. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. The ISS has a solar storm playlist. Really, some astronauts preload music for downtime during shelter protocols. One former crew member shared that his go-to song was Here Comes the Sun. Dark humor, space humor. You take what you can get. Right now, they're probably listening to something quieter, something that drowns out the soft hum of anxiety, because they know what you may not. The station is vulnerable. If a flare hits just right, it can induce currents in the solar arrays, overload circuits, even nudge the orbit slightly. Space is full of tiny frictions, and under pressure, they build. And while you lie comfortably on Earth, the astronauts drift inside a floating machine just centimeters from vacuum, counting the seconds until the storm passes. They've trained for this, but it doesn't feel like training. Outside, the auroras are flaring so brightly they're visible from orbit. The astronauts can see them sweeping across the poles in real time. Ghostly curtains of green and red undulating across the curvature of the Earth. One astronaut presses her face to the window before ducking back into shelter. Looks like the Earth is wearing armor, she says. It isn't. Not tonight. The magnetosphere is holding, but barely. The solar wind is hammering the upper atmosphere, stripping ions, nudging satellites, rattling the ionospheric currents. And the sunspots, the ones shaped like a frown, are rotating closer to dead center. If another flare comes now, if it's strong enough, the ISS might need to adjust its orbit to avoid a particle-rich zone. And while the odds of catastrophic damage are low, they're not zero. The astronauts know that. And still, they float, breathe, wait. And in the meantime, someone cracks a space food packet of beef stroganoff and mutters, "Nothing like gourmet dining at the end of the world." You smile, because there's something deeply human about finding humor in the shadow of something so enormous. Above you, the astronauts wait out the storm. Below you, the world spins on, blissfully unaware that the people living in space are holding their breath. The ancient world didn't have a word for CME. No one in Babylon or Tikal or Giza looked up and muttered, "Ah, yes." On a moderate X-class flare, followed by a coronal mass ejection with Earth-directed trajectory. But they noticed. Oh, they noticed. Because long before we wrapped our planet in digital thread and tried to shield our minds with push notifications, we watched the sky with hungry eyes and twitching nerves. The ancients didn't understand what the sun was doing, but they knew when it started acting strange. And they recorded it in myths, in monuments, in stone. Tonight, as the magnetosphere trembles and the satellites blink and blink again, you might want to remember, this is not humanity's first solar rodeo, just the most fragile one. Look back far enough, and the warnings are everywhere. Petroglyphs in Chaco Canyon, for example. Spirals, dots, radial bursts, etched into rock over 1,000 years ago. Some researchers believe they aren't just art, but records of solar events. One figure, dated to around 1054, coincides eerily with the supernova that created the Crab Nebula. Others may depict auroras, seen far too far south, glowing blood red in skies that should have been calm. In 774 CE, Chinese astronomers recorded a guest star in the sky, brilliant, sudden, and unsettling. Around the same time, tree ring data shows a spike in carbon-14 levels, suggesting a sudden radiation event. Not a supernova, most believe, but something closer, something solar. Historians still argue whether the sun was responsible, whether a mega flare, 10 times stronger than anything we've seen since, could explain the data. The timing matches. But the records are vague, poetic. Heaven's breath burned the sky, one text reads. That's not a unit of measurement, but it paints a picture. Meanwhile, in the shadow of the pyramids, archaeologists puzzle over alignments. Certain temples, like those in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and even Angkor, aren't just pointed at the solstices. Some line up with specific solar zenith points, as if built to track more than the passing of time. As if someone long ago was very interested in when the sun hit certain angles, and what happened when it did. You breathe in. Let that sink. Because tonight, those angles matter again. Solar observatories, both orbital and Earth-based, are seeing resonance, patterns, a rise in certain frequencies of solar vibration that seem oddly synchronized with Earth's position. It could be a coincidence. It probably is. But that hasn't stopped scientists from cross-referencing the data with ancient astronomical calendars. If there's a chart making the rounds in certain private forums, shared by heliophysicists, not crackpots, that overlays the solar cycle with ancient long-count dates from the Mayan calendar. There's a match, a rhythmic alignment between high solar activity and what the Maya described as the sun's rebirth. Coincidence again? Maybe, but it's worth noting that the Maya also documented solar flares, in art, through metaphor. Giant serpents emerging from the sun's mouth, a firestorm in the sky, people blinded, crops scorched, gods descending to calm the star. They knew something was wrong. And then there's the Norse. In the poetic Edda, there's a strange verse. The sun turns black, earth sinks in the sea, hot stars rain down from heaven. It's supposed to describe Ragnarok, the end of the world. But it reads a lot like someone watching the sky fill with auroras and fallout. And remember, the Norse didn't live near the poles. If they were seeing lights in the sky, something big was happening. Your quirky tidbit for the night? In 1882, just after the peak of a strong solar cycle, witnesses across the British Isles reported a phantom sun. A blood-red orb appeared in the sky at night. Not an aurora, not the moon. Some thought it was a second sun. Others fled indoors. Scientists never agreed on a cause. It faded after a few hours. But local folklore picked it up, weaving it into stories of omens and gods. And tonight, all over social media, people are doing the same. Two suns over Utah. Sky snake in Argentina. Purple spirals again over Saskatchewan. These aren't scientists. They're civilians, sky watchers. Yet people with phones pointed upward, asking the same questions ancient scribes once etched into stone. What is that? Why now? Should I be afraid? And here's the honest answer. We don't know. Despite all our tech and terminology, our understanding of the sun is still weirdly primitive. We model its cycles, we name its eruptions, but we don't fully understand the cause of its mood swings. Sometimes it sleeps, sometimes it roars, and sometimes, like now, it acts like something is pulling at it from the inside. A few solar physicists have begun comparing current solar behavior to fragments from the Babylonian Mul.Apin texts, clay tablets that served as the ancient world's astronomical cheat sheet. They describe the god's fire that moves across the sky, sometimes in broad daylight. Some believe that might have been a flare. And what we know for certain is this. People were scared. Often, the sky changed and they noticed. So don't feel silly if you're staring at your window tonight, watching for flickers. You're participating in something ancient. You are not the first to feel the edge of solar pressure, to sense the world above you shimmering just slightly out of tune. Maybe that's what the old stone carvings are really about. Not prophecy, not myth, just memory, etched by hands that also lay awake at night, beneath a sky that had stopped behaving. You don't understand how solar weather works. Don't worry. Neither does most of the planet, which is strange considering it affects everything from your mood to your microwave. But somewhere between high school science class and your last Wi-Fi outage, the concept of space weather got lost in the shuffle. Tornadoes? Yeah, we study those. Hurricanes? Whole teams of reporters will stand sideways in 100 miles per hour winds just to tell you one's coming. But a solar storm? You'll hear about it after your navigation app reroutes you into a lake. That's because solar science is complicated, slippery. It doesn't play by the rules we like. It's not visual enough for the news and not immediate enough for your weather app. And let's be honest, who really wants to learn about plasma dynamics before bed? You, apparently. So let's start with the basics. The sun is not solid. It's a sphere of plasma, a chaotic soup of charged particles, electromagnetic fields, and seething currents. Think of it as a boiling ocean made of fire, with loops of magnetic tension rising and snapping in an endless dance. The surface? That's not the surface at all. Just the photosphere, the thin outer layer that shines. Beneath that, it's madness, twisting fields, convection zones. A core so hot that hydrogen fuses into helium and releases more energy every second than humanity has used, ever. All of this bubbling pressure builds magnetic fields, and those fields wrap around the sun like rubber bands around a balloon. Sometimes those bands tangle, stretch, snap, and when they do, we get flares, CMS, bursts of solar wind carrying billions of tons of plasma into space at ludicrous speeds. Sometimes they miss us, sometimes they don't. Earth has a shield, of course, the magnetosphere. It deflects most of the bad stuff, channels some of it to the poles, where it creates auroras and absorbs the rest. But this shield isn't perfect. It flexes, warps, cracks. And when solar activity is high, like now, those cracks become problems. The issue? We don't fully understand why the sun acts the way it does. We have models, the 11-year solar cycle, the solar dynamo. But there are gaps, blind spots, moments where our equations stutter and the real sun just shrugs and does something else. Historians still argue whether the Maunder minimum, a 70-year sunspot drought in the 1600s, was a random blip or a sign of deeper cycles we've yet to map. Climate shifted during that time. Rivers froze, crops failed, and still most people have no idea it even happened. Right now, solar scientists are scrambling to adjust their models. The current cycle, cycle 25, wasn't supposed to be strong. All the predictions pointed to a quiet phase. Low sunspot activity, fewer flares, minimal disruption. Instead, we got this. See, sunspots have exploded in number. Flares are more frequent. The sun's magnetic poles flipped earlier than expected. And just last week, a filament of plasma, the size of Earth, snapped loose and spiraled into interplanetary space like a flaming streamer. Nobody saw it coming. And that's the part people don't like to hear. For all our satellites, all our solar observatories, we're still guessing, still reacting, still hoping that the next flare won't take out a satellite we didn't think was in the path. Meanwhile, the public gets vague warnings. Minor geomagnetic disturbances expected. That's code for your pilot may have to reroute, your bank's timestamp might glitch, and your microwave could start making that weird buzzing sound again. It's not that people don't want to understand. It's that solar weather education simply isn't prioritized. There's no national preparedness campaign, no catchy jingles, no brightly colored radar graphics sweeping over a map of the magnetosphere. because we don't know how to explain something that's both invisible and massively consequential. Here's your quirky fact for the night. In the 1970s, NASA briefly floated the idea of a solar weather warning system for the public. Sort of like tornado sirens, but for flares. It never got past internal memos. Too abstract, they said. Too difficult to time. What are you going to do? Tell everyone to turn off their electronics for 3 hours? Stay indoors during peak magnetospheric flux? So the idea died, and with it, the chance to make the public aware that yes, space has weather, and it affects your Tuesday. Tonight, if the solar wind is pouring over the Earth like a river of hot data, the magnetic field is bowing, instruments are twitching, the auroras are creeping south, the radiation levels are rising, and most people are still refreshing their apps, wondering why the GPS can't find their driveway. You know now. You're not an expert, but you're tuned in, because knowledge, even half-baked, vaguely whispered, podcast-level knowledge, is power. And while the sun continues to grumble, you understand the pattern a little better. You know the signs, the static, the drift, the quiet between satellite heartbeats. And maybe next time your lights flicker during a cloudless night, or your smartwatch decides it's 1998 again, you won't panic. You'll just look up, squint through the haze, and say, ah, space weather. The science isn't perfect. The models don't always hold, but the sun is speaking. And now at least you're listening. It always starts with tinfoil. Well, tinfoil hats to be precise. You know the image. Paranoid, bug-eyed, murmuring about solar flares, triggering mind control satellites. Fringe stuff. The kind of theory you scroll past at 3 a.m. and chuckle at right before watching a video on how birds might actually be government drones. But here's the uncomfortable part. Every now and then, the fringe brushes up against something real. Not right, necessarily, but not entirely wrong either. And when the sun starts acting up, when the sky turns green over Kentucky, and aircraft navigation systems hiccup in unison, a few of those so-called truthers start to sound, oddly prepared. Tonight, the internet is teeming with solar event theories, not from NASA, not from observatories, from people in basements, hobbyists with weather balloons, amateur radio operators in Nebraska who claim they felt the flare in their fillings. One guy with a ham radio rig in rural France just posted a signal sweep showing strange noise patterns at frequencies that shouldn't even be active. Coincidence? Maybe. Glitch? Probably. But people are noticing. And noticing breeds stories, and stories feed theories. Solar conspiracy theories are nothing new. Historians still argue whether Emanuel Swedenborg, the 18th century mystic who claimed to visit the afterlife in dreams, was having genuine visions or simply responding to geomagnetic disturbances. His writings surged in productivity during periods of strong solar activity. Just an artistic quirk or something more? Electromagnetic? Here's a fringe theory that's getting fresh traction tonight. Solar flares cause temporary shifts in consciousness. Yep. The idea is that geomagnetic storms can interfere with brainwave activity, particularly in the pineal gland. You know the one, center of your forehead, supposedly your third eye, depending on how many crystals are on your nightstand? The theory suggests that sudden magnetic pressure can trigger lucid dreams, precognitive flashes, or altered states of awareness. It's been around since at least the 60s, nestled between psychedelics and CIA-funded research. No real data, just anecdotes. But now, with radiation levels rising and dreams turning vivid, people are sharing their stories again. I dreamed the sun blinked, and my phone melted. My cat screamed at a wall right before the sky turned red. Why is everyone I know awake at 3:33 a.m.? Weirdly specific, weirdly common. Even you may have felt it. The restlessness, the buzzing skin, the uncanny déjà vu. It's easy to dismiss, but in the back corners of internet forums, fringe thinkers are mapping it out, cross-referencing geomagnetic indices with human behavior. Watching how the KP index climbs and Reddit's strangest corners light up like a Vegas strip. One user posts a graph showing a spike in solar X-ray flux, followed by a burst of emotionally erratic tweets from major public figures. Pure correlation, probably, but unnerving all the same. And here's a quirky historical nugget. In 1961, a small town in southern France experienced a brief but intense wave of hallucinations. People ran into the streets claiming to see the sun dancing and faces in the clouds. It was blamed on contaminated bread, but decades later, a group of researchers pointed out that the event occurred during a strong solar flare. Was it ergot poisoning, mass hysteria, or something more? Radiant? The official story never changed, but the sun was definitely active that week. There's a growing pocket of amateur scientists, solar storm preppers basically, who have built their lives around this kind of vigilance. They monitor magnetometers, build their own Faraday cages, keep backup analog watches and paper maps. They don't trust GPS. They don't trust digital anything. And as of tonight, they're feeling vindicated. One particularly enthusiastic YouTuber is holding a live stream from his solar-proofed garden shed, which are complete with EMF shielding and backup generators. He's drinking canned soup and predicting digital lockdown within 72 hours. He's been wrong before, repeatedly. But this time, the satellite logs are glitching, and there was a shortwave radio burst earlier that nobody can explain. Even the scientific community is feeling the pressure. A few respected astrophysicists have issued unusually vague public statements in the last 24 hours. Not the usual jargon. Just things like, we are monitoring the situation closely, and the field is not behaving predictably, which if you're a solar truther is basically a confession. And then there's the document. It's not classified, not really, but it was never meant to trend. A 2010 report from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security outlining the risks of extreme solar events. It warns that a major flare could disable communication, knock out power, disrupt global positioning, and impact psychological stability due to electromagnetic stress. Guess what's being passed around like wildfire tonight? You're lying there in the dark, blanket pulled tight, and suddenly those fringe voices don't seem quite so distant. They're not right, but they're circling something real, something primal, that subtle terror that we've built our world on blinking lights and we barely understand what's blinking anymore. And the sun keeps flaring. You breathe in. Not everything you read tonight will be true. Most of it will be noise. But tucked inside the memes and microwave radiation rumors, there's a sliver of warning worth hearing. We don't control the sky. And the people who've been yelling that for years, wrapped in tinfoil and muttering about magnetic fields, they may not have the whole picture, but they were watching, and they knew the sun doesn't always play nice. The room goes dark. Not your room. Not yet. But somewhere across the hemisphere, the power grid hiccups. Just a flicker at first, a flickering light bulb here, a buzzing transformer there. Then the switches trip, the breakers snap, and entire neighborhoods blink out like fireflies in a jar. This isn't a blackout. Not yet. This is the quiet beginning of grid chess. Because when a solar storm hits Earth, the real battlefield isn't in space, it's here. Wound through your walls, your phone charger, your streetlights and stoplights and airport runways. The grid. And right now, behind locked doors and glowing screens, teams of engineers are playing the highest stakes strategy game on the planet. You probably don't know what a geomagnetically induced current, GIC, is. That's okay. Most people don't, but you live with them. Right now, they're surging through high-voltage power lines like uninvited guests. Currents born not from human demand, but from the flexing of Earth's magnetic field. When the solar wind punches the magnetosphere, the flux compresses the field like an accordion. That movement induces current. And long transmission lines, the ones stretching across whole states, act like antennas, soaking up those rogue electrical whispers. And transformers? Oh, transformers hate that. Unlike a surge from, say, a lightning strike, geomagnetically induced currents are sneaky. They drift in like fog, slow, sustained, and utterly unplanned for. And they saturate magnetic cores, overheat circuits, and cause transformers to buzz ominously before either failing outright or quietly frying themselves from the inside. Historians still argue whether the 2003 blackout in the northeastern U.S. was worsened by an undetected solar event. Official reports blame software errors and line sag, but solar physicists have long noted a flare that preceded it by only hours. Nothing confirmed, just suspicion. But the correlation lingered. Tonight, the operators aren't waiting to find out. At power dispatch centers from Ontario to Oslo, engineers are rerouting loads, isolating substations, balancing frequency like tightrope walkers in a windstorm. The grid isn't one machine, it's thousands of them, stitched together with software, trust, and an increasingly fragile sense of control. What they're playing grid chess, moving power like pawns, sacrificing some regions to protect others, brownouts in rural areas to preserve hospitals, intermittent voltage drops to keep the data centers breathing. If the storm strengthens, they'll start pulling generation offline, shutting down supply to reduce the chance of explosive overloads. You might notice it as a flicker, a screen that blinks and recovers, the hum of your refrigerator dipping for half a second. But what you don't see are the conversations happening over encrypted headsets, the rapid typing of fail-safes, the quiet math of 1,000 people trying to keep the lights on against a storm they can't see. Meanwhile, a transformer in Saskatchewan fails with a muffled thud. Nothing dramatic, just a puff of smoke, a loss of telemetry, tunnel in a cascading reroute that trips 5 substations in a ripple effect. Elsewhere in Texas, a grid operator manually trips a line, just in case. The surge doesn't come. But when it does 30 seconds later, they're already one move ahead. That one cut just saved 200,000 homes from going dark. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In 1989, during a geomagnetic storm, Quebec lost power for 9 hours. The cause? A transformer melted. Not exploded, melted. The internal wiring cooked like overboiled spaghetti. Engineers rebuilt it by hand. And after that, Canada became one of the first countries to take solar weather very seriously. Tonight, those same protocols are being tested again. And yet, most people have no idea. They'll blame the outage on wind, or demand, or corporate neglect. And the idea that the sun could knock out their dishwasher or derail a subway system feels absurd. But that's the problem with solar events. They're slow disasters, not dramatic enough to film, not explosive enough to trend. Just invisible fingers pressing on the backbone of our civilization. The grid is still holding. Barely. But this is just the first wave. The CMEs launched earlier today are still in transit. One flare hit hours ago, but 2 more are right behind it. The second is stronger. The third is a mystery. Fast, hot, magnetically twisted in ways we can't model yet. And if they stack, if one hits before the field recovers from the last, we're in real trouble. Stacked flares. That's a worst-case scenario, because when the grid's balance is disrupted, it can unravel in seconds. Frequency drops, overloads spike, as generators fall out of sync and cascade like dominoes, and restarting a grid isn't like flipping a switch. It's a choreographed dance, requiring black start units, manual resets, and sometimes helicopters to physically realign transmission towers. Your lights could go out, and stay out, for hours, days if things go badly. And while emergency services have backup systems, even those rely on stable infrastructure. Hospitals can't run on generators forever. Water pumps can fail. Gas stations can't pump fuel without power. You roll over and wonder, how close are we now? Close enough that power utilities are issuing quiet advisories to critical sites. Data centers are prepping diesel generators. Water treatment plants are double-checking switchgear. A few regional operators have even taken systems offline preemptively. It's not panic, not yet. Just a high alert. You'll probably never hear the phrase geomagnetically induced current on the news tomorrow. You'll hear about isolated outages, maybe unexpected equipment failures. But make no mistake, the storm is here, and the grid is listening. So far, the chess game continues. Move, counter-move. Engineers working in real time, warding off a star's fury with math and caffeine and nerves of steel. But the board is heating up, and if the next flare hits harder, checkmate. The ionosphere is not quiet tonight. Far above your rooftop, beyond the clouds and the breathable air, hovers a layer of Earth's upper atmosphere that you almost never think about. It's called the ionosphere, and it's responsible for bouncing radio signals, guiding satellite transmissions, and behaving like a giant atmospheric trampoline for global communication. Except right now, it's not bouncing anything. It's howling. The solar storm has reached it. Waves of radiation and solar wind are crashing into this delicate zone, shaking its electrons loose like coins in a dryer. And when the ionosphere gets rattled, the rest of us lose our voices. Radio operators call it a scream, not in sound, but in data. Frequencies vanish. Transmissions that once skimmed neatly around the globe now plunge into static. Pilots flying over oceans report sudden blackouts in high-frequency comms. Ships at sea, dependent on HF radio for position reports, are going dark on tracking screens. Not sunk, just unheard. And back here on Earth, a group of ham radio hobbyists are pacing their cluttered garages, checking antennas, retuning dials, listening to nothing. The entire 20-meter band? Dead. The 40-meter band? Screeching with ghost tones. One operator in Montana records a sudden burst of what sounds like whispering Morse code, only backwards. He replays it 3 times before his equipment fries. Your phone doesn't rely on this kind of radio, but GPS does. So do aircraft. So does international shipping and military systems. And tonight, with the ionosphere in full magnetic seizure, those signals are distorting, bent, twisted, lost. You may not hear it, but the skies are full of ghost signals. Historians still argue whether the sky trumpets reported in medieval texts, loud metallic groans from above, were auroral acoustic phenomena or simply natural atmospheric harmonics amplified by geomagnetic activity. Some now believe it was a primitive reaction to ionospheric disruption, people feeling the field scream without understanding what it was. Because here's the unnerving truth. Sometimes the ionosphere doesn't just go silent, it starts to sing. It's called spherics, short bursts of electromagnetic energy that translate, when processed correctly, into sound, like chirps, whistles, groans. These are real. You can hear them if you have the right equipment. Natural radio born from lightning, solar wind, and the Earth's own pulse. And tonight, the spherics are off the charts. Researchers listening from ground stations in Alaska, Finland, and Argentina are picking up simultaneous bursts of VLF, very low frequency, radiation that seem patterned, not intelligent, not artificial, just strangely rhythmic. One calls it a heartbeat with arrhythmia. Another describes it as a chorus of invisible wails. You lie in your bed, unaware, while a symphony of magnetic turbulence unfolds overhead. Meanwhile, air traffic controllers are moving planes off polar routes. The radiation is too high, the signals too unreliable. Aircraft that were supposed to cross the North Pole are now swinging wide, burning extra fuel to stay connected. The detours are costing millions, but they're better than flying blind. Some flights drop to lower altitudes where communication is more stable, but the turbulence is worse. You can almost hear the seatbelt signs chiming from 30,000 feet away. And here's a strange little tidbit for you. In 2003, during a moderate solar storm, a set of deep-sea communication cables registered electromagnetic interference. They weren't designed to pick up such signals, but they did, recording what some researchers described as submarine lightning. To this day, no one agrees on how the ionosphere could reach that deep, but tonight it's doing something new again. Somewhere in Australia, a research balloon equipped with a low-frequency antenna just transmitted a bizarre reading, a vertical spike in ionospheric resonance. Sustained for 10 minutes, then gone. No lightning, no known trigger, just a flare-up of energy that should not exist in this frequency range. The balloon is still in the air, but its backup sensors are dead. You may be tempted to dismiss all this. Just noise, science doing science things. But ask the ham radio operator who just watched his rig melt. Ask the airline dispatchers juggling dozens of flights on new routes. Ask the submarine crew beneath the Pacific who just lost their orientation ping for 30 minutes. The ionosphere is screaming, and it's not just the signals that are distorted, it's the silence that follows. In the brief gaps between bursts, between spherics and fade-outs, there's an absence of signal that makes your skin crawl. An atmospheric hush so complete, it feels like the planet is holding its breath. And you? You're still warm in your bed, eyes fluttering near sleep, only half aware that the electromagnetic veil between your world and space has gone translucent. Leaky, haunted by flares and whispers. This is the part of the solar storm no one tells you about. Not the lights or the fires or the fried circuits, but the part where the sky stops speaking in ways you can understand and starts saying something else entirely. Yeah, you probably didn't know the sun could have tornadoes. Not the kind that rips shingles off your neighbor's roof or throws a cow into a Kansas cornfield, but towering columns of spinning plasma, hotter than anything on Earth and bigger than entire planets. Solar tornadoes. And right now they're spinning faster than we've ever recorded. This isn't poetic exaggeration. This is literal. Massive spiraling vortexes of charged gas and magnetic fury, twisting upward from the sun's surface like fire devils. They form when magnetic fields get tangled, snap, and reconnect, causing plasma to swirl in enormous arching spirals. Think of it like nature's worst lava lamp, but 300,000 kilometers tall and angry. And tonight, the latest satellite footage shows one stretching higher than anything we've seen in 2 decades. It's wide, it's fast, and it's unstable. One solar physicist described it as a harbinger. Another just called it wrong. Because while solar tornadoes aren't new, the scale and speed of this one, now tearing through the sun's chromosphere, is unprecedented. It's feeding off the same magnetic instability that's already launched 2 flares toward Earth this week. And if it collapses, it could hurl a hybrid CME straight into our orbit. That's a coronal mass ejection fused with filament eruption energy. Think solar haymaker. And here's your quirky fact of the night. The term solar tornado wasn't taken seriously for decades. Early observations in the 1920s were dismissed as optical illusions, artifacts of flawed imaging. It wasn't until the Solar Dynamics Observatory launched in 2010 that we finally got proof. Video evidence. Time-lapse footage showing plasma corkscrewing at over 300,000 kilometers per hour. The science community politely freaked out. Now, with better instruments and real-time imaging, we're seeing things we weren't ready to see. And the sun? It's apparently decided now is a good time to remind us that it's not just a light bulb in the sky. It's a storm machine. You lie there half dozing as the latest solar tornado twists closer to the edge of the sun's limb. The part that, if it lets go, could send that CME right at us. The models are running, simulations blinking, and every few minutes the projected trajectory shifts. One says glancing blow, another says direct hit. The issue, solar tornadoes are nearly impossible to predict. They can unravel at any moment, triggering chain reactions across the sun's surface, or they can just keep spinning for hours, for days, winding tighter, hotter, more volatile with every pass. You've probably never thought about magnetic helicity before. That's okay, most people haven't. It's the term for how twisted magnetic fields become, how knotted, how unstable, how likely they are to lash out. And tonight, the helicity readings on this particular vortex are worrying. This isn't just a novelty. This is the solar equivalent of a supercell, except it's not floating over farmland. It's hovering over the most active sunspot cluster in the current cycle. And that cluster is now rotating squarely into geo-effective position. You remember that from earlier, the part of the sun that faces Earth directly, like the barrel of a cannon spinning into place. Meanwhile, back here on Earth, we're not blind. Instruments on satellites like SDO, SOHO, Wax and Parker are beaming back minute-by-minute updates. Space weather centers are refreshing dashboards like stock traders on a crash day. And in the quiet corner of an academic Discord server, a group of solar physicists are comparing notes and casually dropping phrases like nonlinear destabilization and filament shear spike. Translation, it's winding up. Historians still argue whether a solar tornado in 1859 contributed to the Carrington event's sheer violence. There are no direct records of it, of course, but drawings of snaking sun threads and swirling black columns were found in the notebooks of solar observers from that era. Too primitive to confirm, but the descriptions are unsettlingly close. And now, with this modern monster twisting across the solar limb, those old sketches seem less poetic and more prophetic. What happens if it collapses? That depends on the magnetic orientation. If the CME's magnetic field is aligned with Earth's in a certain way, specifically opposite polarity, It can sneak through the magnetosphere like a knife through butter. That's when transformers fry, satellites fail, aurora borealis turns into aurora, everywhere. That's when the lights start going out. Right now, magnetometers around the world are watching the background levels tick up. Subtle, consistent, like tension pulling tighter across the planet. The field isn't screaming yet, but it's humming. That low electric prelude that says something big is on the way. The solar tornado is still holding, but no one knows for how long. You roll over and try to shake the image. A column of fire, 10 Earths tall, winding tighter and tighter until something gives. A celestial spring coiled to the breaking point. It shouldn't be possible for something so far away to feel so close, but the sun is closer than it looks, not just in distance, but in consequence. Here's the final unsettling thought. The light from that tornado takes 8 minutes to reach us. If it snaps and flares, we won't know for 8 minutes. It'll already be on the way. So maybe we're already waiting. Maybe that flare is already in transit, and the sky is just holding its breath before the first glow appears on the horizon. It starts with a flicker in the data, not a surge, not a spike, just a slow, undulating wave, barely perceptible unless you're looking for it. And tonight, the people looking for it are seeing something strange ripple through the Earth's magnetic field. A pulse, not the sharp jab of a solar flare, not the rush of a coronal mass ejection slamming into the ionosphere like a freight train. This is different, softer, slower. It's like the planet is inhaling and then exhaling again. Right now, magnetometers from Iceland to Indonesia are picking up subtle oscillations, tiny shifts in Earth's geomagnetic field strength that move like waves across the globe. This isn't a standard geomagnetic storm. This is something more delicate, a full planet shiver. It's called a global magnetic impulse, a rhythmic low-frequency fluctuation in the geomagnetic field that can last minutes, even hours. Most go unnoticed, but this one's larger, more widespread, and no one seems to agree on why. There's an ongoing debate among researchers about whether these pulses are purely solar-driven or if Earth itself contributes to them. Historians still argue whether reports of mass unease during ancient solar storms, like the Day of Restlessness, documented in 1128 AD, were tied to similar impulses. Monks in Europe wrote of the air vibrating and a pull in the bones. Not poetry, descriptions. The kind you feel more than understand. And that's the unsettling part. Because tonight, the magnetic pulse might be brushing against you. It doesn't feel like much, just a weird itch behind your thoughts, a low hum in the base of your spine. A few studies, fringe admittedly, suggest humans might be able to detect shifts in the geomagnetic field at a subconscious level. Not like birds or whales do, but faintly, a phantom sense, long buried. You ever wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, no reason why? Maybe it wasn't anxiety. Maybe it was a field fluctuation. That's the theory anyway. A small group of neurogeophysicists are studying correlations between magnetic pulses and human mood, brainwave patterns, even heart rate variability. Early data shows that geomagnetic disturbances can possibly influence melatonin production, the hormone that governs your sleep cycle. So if you're tossing and turning tonight, dreaming in color, or feeling strangely awake at 2:47 a.m., maybe don't blame the coffee. Blame the pulse. Satellite data from the Swarm constellation, 3 spacecraft that measure Earth's magnetic field, shows a swirl of high-latitude anomalies tonight. Swirling bands of activity in the polar zones that look like, well, like weather. But there's no storm, no cyclone, just the field bending and unbending like it's being strummed. Somewhere, a geophysicist rubs her eyes and double-checks the graphs. This isn't supposed to happen during a low K-index window, and yet here it is, a heartbeat without a heart. Meanwhile, ground-based VLF stations are picking up magnetic resonance harmonics, soft, tremor-like frequencies that echo through the crust. Not dangerous, not damaging, just strange, like the planet's tuning fork has been plucked by a solar finger. And here's your quirky tidbit. During the 1958 geomagnetic storm, A handful of researchers claimed to hear faint tones, like musical notes, coming from old analog magnetometers. Not hums, notes. They called it magnetic song. The machines weren't calibrated to record audio, so there's no proof, just logs and wide-eyed reports. Tonight, that song might be back. One amateur researcher with a homemade magnetometer, built out of copper wire, a shoebox, and some magnets, has been streaming data live for 48 hours. His device starts oscillating every 92 minutes, like clockwork. He thinks it's synced to something above us. The International Space Station? A satellite pass? Or something older? No one knows. You lie there in the dark, and maybe you feel it too. Not pain, not pressure, just an odd tightness in your ribs, a hyper-awareness of your limbs, as if your body's internal compass is twitching. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe you're part of it, because everything electric within you, your heartbeat, your brain waves, the bioelectric field that dances across your skin, all of it coexists within Earth's magnetic field. And when that field shifts, even gently, it nudges everything inside it. Right now, EEG readings from sleep labs in 3 countries are showing unusually synchronized REM cycles across patients in different time zones. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe the pulse connects more than we think. Some cultures believed the Earth had a soul, that it breathed, dreamed, pulsed in time with the heavens. Sound fanciful? Then explain why our magnetic field hums in frequencies that align eerily with human brainwave ranges. Alpha, theta, delta, sleep, dream, wake. That's real. That's measurable. That's odd. And tonight, those frequencies are drifting. One scientist referred to it as planetary entrainment. Another just called it the Big Sync. You don't need to understand the science to feel it. Just breathe. Notice the weight in your chest, the way silence feels less like absence and more like pressure, and the way time feels slightly off. This is the magnetic pulse. It won't knock out satellites, it won't crash the grid, but it might make your dreams strange, your sleep restless, your thoughts wander in ways they don't usually. You are not malfunctioning, you're just riding the ripple. The sun is supposed to follow rules. That's what we thought, at least. A big fiery clock in the sky, predictable, rhythmic, a machine made of plasma and gravity, ticking through its 11-year solar cycles like a metronome forged in thermonuclear fire. But now the rhythm's gone weird. We're technically in what scientists call solar cycle 25, a new phase that began in late 2019, expected to peak around 2025. It should be a modest cycle, calmer than its recent predecessors. That's what the model said. That's what everyone believed. And then the sun started getting rowdy. Right now, it's flaring like we're already past the peak. Sunspot numbers are double what they were projected to be. Filaments are snapping, polarities are flipping. And all the neatly drawn curves on solar activity charts are beginning to look more like heart monitors during cardiac arrest. It's not just that things are more intense, it's that they're out of order. Solar minimum came earlier than expected. Solar maximum is ramping harder than projected. And in between, chaos. Scientists are throwing around phrases like hyper-accelerated plasma turbulence and nonlinear magnetic inversion, which, if you translate that into plain English, comes out roughly as, the sun is being super weird and we're not sure why. Historians still argue whether solar cycle 4, back in the late 1700s, it was also a double-peaked anomaly. Records were fuzzy, observations inconsistent, but there were rumors of strange auroras and bizarre agricultural anomalies, crops ripening out of season, birds migrating off sync. At the time, people blamed witches, which frankly was the go-to explanation for just about everything back then. But now, in a world full of satellites and sensors, we're running out of scapegoats. The phrase being whispered in observatory break rooms tonight, grand minimum, or maybe even rogue cycle. A grand minimum is when the sun dramatically reduces its activity for decades or centuries. The last one, the Maunder minimum, coincided with the Little Ice Age, when the Thames froze solid and people held winter fairs on the ice. But what's happening now feels like the opposite. Not a cooling off, but a scramble. A solar tantrum. Some are beginning to wonder if we're witnessing the birth of a rogue cycle, a deviation from the standard 11-year ebb and flow, possibly tied to long-forgotten rhythms deep within the sun's core. Cycles nested within cycles, like Russian dolls. Except one of them is full of fire. And it's not just Earth watching. Mars's orbiters have picked up increased solar activity too. Dust storms behaving strangely, magnetometers twitching even in the thin Martian air. Spacecraft sensors around Jupiter and Saturn are getting anomalous readings. A coronal wave that erupted 3 days ago from the sun's surface is now sweeping through the solar system like a shock wave, brushing past everything in its path. One researcher at ESA compared it to a galactic ripple in the bathtub. Another just muttered, "Something woke up." Meanwhile, here on Earth, auroras are glowing in places they've never been recorded before. People in the southern hemisphere are taking pictures of green ribbons arching across the outback, mistaking them for bushfires at first. In Thailand, a family posted a video of the sky briefly flashing pink at midnight. No lightning, no explanation. And at the South Pole, a radio quiet zone filled with sensor arrays just lit up like a Christmas tree. Signals no one expected. Frequencies that weren't part of any known solar signature. It's the unpredictability that has everyone on edge. Solar minimum, then solar maximum. Calm, then chaos. But now the transitions are blurring. The sun is lurching between moods, like a record skipping, still playing, but out of sync. You lie in bed half asleep, and maybe you feel it too. That sense that something huge is happening behind the curtain. A stagehand bumping into the backdrop of the sky. The script has gone off book. And here's your quirky fact for the evening. In the 1960s, a fringe physicist proposed that the sun might have moods. Not metaphorically, but as a complex feedback system. Its cycles driven not just by internal thermodynamics, but by interactions with planetary alignments. The idea was dismissed. No real math, no real data, just intuition and magnetic maps scrawled on napkins. But lately, some of those planetary configurations are coming around again. And guess what? The sun is reacting. It could be nothing. Most solar physicists still agree that the standard cycle is holding, just a little noisier, a little messier. But others are quietly building new models. Now ones that factor in variable cycle lengths, double peaks, phase shifts. One such model, leaked online no less, predicts a sudden drop in sunspot activity by the end of next year. Not a gradual decline, a cliff, as if the sun, after a burst of chaos, simply goes still. That wouldn't be the first time, but it would be bad, because if you think a hyperactive sun is dangerous, imagine one that sleeps. A quiet sun means less solar wind, which might sound peaceful, until you realize that Earth's upper atmosphere would begin to collapse inward slightly. GPS satellites would sink. Radiation from deep space, normally deflected by the solar wind, would flood in. The shield would thin. Cosmic rays would rise. It's a trade-off. A storm or silence. And right now, we're trapped between both. Maximum output, minimum logic. You're living in a sun cycle that doesn't make sense. The instruments are still recording. The charts are still updating. But the sense of understanding, the illusion of pattern, is fading. The sun used to hum like a clock. Now it mutters like a stranger in the dark. Somewhere above you right now, the sun is flaring again. This isn't just another solar belch or one of those mild Class C flickers that solar physicists barely bother to log. This is an X-class flare, the kind that sends whole labs into red alert. The kind that doesn't just sizzle, it slams. And this time the flare wasn't lopsided, wasn't angled slightly off, conveniently dodging our magnetosphere. No, this one's coming head on, a flare too far. What makes it different isn't just its size, though yes, it's big enough to earn headlines. What makes this flare a problem is the sequence, because it's hitting Earth at the worst possible moment, when the magnetosphere is already stressed, when geomagnetic currents are already running high, when the ionosphere has been bleeding charge for 36 straight hours. This flare, if you're following the rhythm, is the final straw. and you can feel it before it even arrives. The incoming energy stirs the Van Allen belts, those looping ribbons of radiation encircling Earth like invisible electric barbed wire. Instruments aboard GOES satellites are already chirping with warnings. Charged particles are ramping up. A fast-moving CME, yes, another one, is riding the shock wave of the flare, like a tidal wave surfing behind an earthquake. Scientists call it a cannibal CME. It's when one ejection catches up with another, merges, gains speed, strength, mass. And tonight, Earth is in the path. You shift under the blanket, a little colder now, not from the storm, but from the data. Somewhere out there, a clock is ticking louder than before. Not mechanical, not human, celestial. And it's almost midnight. Satellites begin dropping offline one by one, not exploding, not falling, just blinking out, like someone dimmed the stars. Ground control logs the anomalies. Loss of signal. No telemetry. Reboot attempt failed. They're not gone, just scrambled. GPS satellites begin reporting time discrepancies, tiny errors, a nanosecond here, a microsecond there. But time in the modern world is currency. It's location. It's trade. Every misaligned millisecond ripples through systems we don't think about until they stop working. Banking servers stutter. Financial trades misfire. One exchange freezes temporarily and quietly blames a network condition. Even your phone might act weird. Not broken, just slightly off. App loading slower. Clock flashing the wrong time for a breath before catching itself. Your sleep tracker may log phantom REM cycles you didn't actually have. And deep in the server rooms of every cloud computing center, logs are filling with error messages like snow in a blizzard. Meanwhile, ground-based observatories are scrambling. The flare was just big enough to blind a handful of solar telescopes. Overexposed sensors. Flash saturation. Some researchers stare in awe at the data feed, realizing that even with all our prep, we still can't stare directly into the sun at full screen. Historians still argue whether a 1940s radar failure over the Atlantic, what military records described as a ghost horizon event, was caused by a sudden solar spike. For 10 minutes, planes vanished from screens, reappearing miles from their expected paths, officially blamed on equipment malfunction. But the solar logs from that week? Let's just say they were unusually red. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1972, during a particularly nasty solar flare, sea mines left over from the Vietnam War spontaneously detonated. Over 2 dozen. The U.S. Navy thought it was sabotage until they realized the blast coincided with a solar storm. The magnetic field shifted just enough to trip the sensors. So yes, solar flares can make things go boom. And now tonight, this flare has triggered a cascade of magnetic anomalies. Not dramatic, not cinematic. It's just quiet failures accumulating beneath the surface. You might not notice anything yet, but entire industries are running diagnostics while pretending nothing's wrong. Power companies are reducing load again. The transformers are humming. One grid nearly collapses, saved by a preemptive drop in industrial draw. A control room tech mutters, "We're living on milliseconds." Airlines have grounded some polar flights. A few long-haul planes are rerouted again, this time mid-air. Radiation levels at 40,000 feet spike just enough for the onboard monitors to flash red. Cabin crew dim the lights and pass it off as routine. It's not. And the auroras? Off the charts. Skies in Tennessee are glowing violet and green, stretching past the zenith. People are pulling over on highways to take blurry, breathless videos. In Japan, beachgoers watch crimson veils shimmer over the Pacific. In Nairobi, soft streaks of teal flicker for just 10 minutes before vanishing. Something ancient stirs when the sky behaves like that. Every culture has a word for it. Lights, spirits, serpents, gates. You're watching, too, in your own way. Maybe out your window. Maybe just imagining the color dancing behind your eyelids. The flare hasn't killed your power yet, but your thoughts feel louder. Your dreams, when you blink into them, start warmer and end cold. The space weather alerts are lighting up with higher level warnings. KP index peaking at 9, the highest level, That's the red zone. And the storm is still building. It's not the worst-case scenario, but it's close. The instruments are struggling to keep up. People are falling asleep with their phones charging beside them, unaware that whole data streams are evaporating in silence, that connections are being tested not by hackers or storms, but by the sun simply not behaving. This flare might not end civilization, but it's changing it. Sleep schedules, technology, tides in the magnetosphere, quiet shifts in the electromagnetic background you've lived in your whole life, never noticing. Until now. So you turn in your bed, breathe slow. The flare is still coming, or maybe it's already here. And in the soft hum of the power grid beneath your floorboards, you hear it. A ripple, a breath, the sun exhaling, and earth holding on. And then, quiet, not silence, not safety. Just a kind of strange, vibrating stillness that settles across the planet like dust after a collapse. A false calm, draped in soft auroras and stuttering satellite pings, as if the sun, after all its screaming, has finally run out of breath. But nothing feels normal. You lie there unsure if the quiet is comforting or ominous. Power's still on. The sky is clear. Your phone hasn't melted, but the world doesn't sound quite the same. Not outside, not inside. Because even as the solar wind begins to slow, even as the readings on the magnetometers plateau, there's this undercurrent, like the air around you remembers something it hasn't processed yet, like your bones are still catching up. This wasn't just a solar event, it was a system shock, a reality check from the nearest star, reminding us that we're not in charge. Not of the power, or the signals, or the field that holds everything together like an invisible web stretched tight across the atmosphere. And now that it's over, if it's over, things don't feel restored. They feel rewritten. Satellites are slowly coming back online. Some reboot automatically, shaking off corrupted memory like a computer after a power outage. Others require manual recalibration. A few may never wake up. Tiny digital ghosts now orbiting the Earth, blinking empty against the night. The ISS crew is cautiously emerging from radiation shelter. Systems checks are underway. Radiation dosimeters show elevated exposure, but within survivable margins. Just a few extra days added to long-term risk calculations. A small, invisible cost added to the bill humanity keeps racking up for dancing this close to the sun. Down on Earth, engineers exhale, some in triumph, some in exhaustion. The grid held, mostly. There were failures, yes, blackouts in 3 countries. Several blown transformers in rural zones, a few power stations taken offline preemptively that may take days to reboot. But collapse was averted, because behind every flickering streetlight, there was someone watching, calculating, moving pieces like a chess master hopped up on adrenaline in solar telemetry. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Historians still argue whether the 2001 solar flare that nearly took out a section of the North American grid was a fluke, a near miss, or a lesson that no one took seriously enough. Tonight might end up the same way. A warning disguised as survival. And your quirky fact for the final night? Back in the 1700s, sailors navigating by compass occasionally reported days when their instruments spun without cause. North becoming west, then east, then back again. They called it the devil's swing. And many of those days, we now know, coincided with large auroral events recorded in the same ship's logs. Tonight, some digital compasses are still twitching. The magnetosphere is recovering, slowly. But like a stretched rubber band, it doesn't snap back perfectly. There's a wobble, a memory, an imprint left by the storm. Your body might feel it too. Some people report dizziness after solar storms. Strange dreams, emotional spikes. It's hard to prove. Easy to mock. But if Earth itself can take a few days to stabilize, why wouldn't you? The sun for now has gone back to humming. Its surface, while still spotted and tangled with magnetic loops, is quieter. For now, the tornadoes have subsided, the flares have ceased, but the field, Earth's shield, will take longer to heal. Radio frequencies are still unstable in parts of the world. GPS accuracy remains degraded near the poles, And the high-frequency background hum detected in the ionosphere is slowly fading, but not gone. In scientific terms, we are post-event. In human terms, we are between breaths. The analysts are already reviewing the data, comparing this event to Carrington, to Halloween 2003, to 774 CE, trying to find a name, a category, something to file it under that doesn't simply read "not normal." Meanwhile, in the world of the quietly obsessed, ham radio forums, amateur space weather blogs, niche discords full of doom preppers and sunspot chasers, the mood is reverent. Not panicked, not giddy, just aware. Because once you see the sun like this, you don't unsee it. Once you hear the magnetic pulse in your walls, once you dream in colors no aurora ever promised, you carry that knowledge in your chest. The sun is not just a backdrop, not a lamp, not a friendly nuclear furnace keeping your tomatoes alive. It's a force, uncaring, rhythmic, occasionally violent. And sometimes when the field weakens just enough and the timing is just wrong enough, it reaches through the veil and reminds us how small our systems really are. You pull the blanket tighter, the air feels still, the hum in your ears is softer now. Maybe you'll sleep better tonight. Maybe not. But the storm has passed, and for now, just for now, the sky is quiet.